The crack of a pistol shattered the dusty hush of Laramie, Wyoming Territory, in 1878, as Fiona Riley clutched her newborn twins to her chest and ran for her life. Blood trickled down her temple where her late husband's brother had struck her with his revolver, cursing the twin girls she'd birthed just 3 days prior. "Worthless females," he had roared, eyes wild with whiskey and rage. "Montgomery land goes to Montgomery men, not some whimpering baby girls." Fiona's lungs burned as she stumbled down the alley behind the general store, her weakened body betraying her with each desperate step. The birthing had been difficult, and now, with James Montgomery hunting her like prey, she feared she wouldn't live to see her daughter's 4th day of life. "Where you hiding, widow woman?" James's voice echoed between the buildings, followed by another gunshot that splintered wood near her head. Vaughn McAllister was loading supplies into his wagon when the commotion reached his ears. The 30-year-old cattle driver had just finished delivering a herd to the railroad and was preparing for the journey back to his small ranch outside of Jackson, Wyoming. He'd earned a reputation as a man who minded his own business, but something about the terror in the woman's cry made him set down the sack of flour and reach for the Colt revolver at his hip. As he rounded the corner of the mercantile, he spotted a woman clutching 2 tiny bundles to her chest, her dress torn and face bloodied. Behind her, a red-faced man with murderous intent raised his pistol again. "Stand aside," James bellowed when he noticed Vaughn. "Family business." Vaughn assessed the situation with the quick calculation of a man accustomed to making life or death decisions. The woman's eyes met his pleading, desperate, resigned to death but fighting for her babies. "Lower that gun," Vaughn commanded, his voice steady as Wyoming bedrock. James spat and aimed at Fiona instead. These Montgomery heirs were supposed to be boys. "She's produced nothing but useless girls who can't inherit. I'm doing what my brother should have done." The crack of Vaughn's pistol interrupted James's tirade. The bullet struck the wall beside James's head, showering him with splinters. "Next one won't miss," Vaughn promised, his blue eyes cold as winter ice. "Now lower that gun before I put you in the ground." James wavered, his alcohol-fueled courage diminishing under Vaughn's unflinching stare. With a curse, he lowered his weapon. Vaughn moved to the woman's side, noting her pallor and the way she swayed on her feet. The babies in her arms were impossibly small, their tiny faces red and wrinkled. "He'll kill us," she whispered. "As soon as you're gone, he'll find us again." Vaughn made a decision then that would alter the course of 3 lives, 5, counting the tiny infants. He holstered his gun and gently took her elbow. "You're coming with me," the cowboy declared, loud enough for James to hear. "No one's going to harm you or your children." James lurched forward. "She's my responsibility now, my brother's widow. She's no one's property," Vaughn cut him off. "And those children deserve to live." With one arm supporting Fiona and the other reaching for his gun again, Vaughn backed toward his wagon. "If you follow us," he warned James, "you'll be dead before sundown." The threat hung in the air between them as Vaughn helped Fiona and her babies into his wagon. James finally staggered backward, pointing a finger at them. "This ain't over," he slurred. "Montgomery land goes to Montgomery men." Vaughn climbed onto the wagon seat and flicked the reins. The horses lurched forward, carrying them away from Laramie and the danger that James Montgomery represented. "Thank you," Fiona murmured, clutching her babies close as they jolted down the rutted street. "But where are we going?" Vaughn's eyes remained fixed on the road ahead. "Somewhere safe." He paused, then added more softly, "I've got a small place outside of Jackson. It's not much, but he won't find you there." The wagon rattled out of town, leaving a trail of dust in its wake. Fiona's heart raced with fear and uncertainty, but for the first time in days, a flicker of hope kindled in her chest. Her daughters might live to see another sunrise after all. As they traveled farther from Laramie, Fiona's exhaustion overtook her, and she slumped against the wagon's side, her eyes closing despite her efforts to remain alert. "Rest," Vaughn said, his voice gentler than before. "I'll wake you when we need to stop and tend to the little ones." Fiona's last thought before surrendering to unconsciousness was that she didn't even know the name of the man who had just saved her life and the lives of her precious daughters. The afternoon sun beat down on them as they traveled northwest, away from the danger that lurked in Laramie. Vaughn occasionally glanced at his unexpected passengers, concern etching lines around his eyes. The woman was pale, too pale, and those babies looked hardly big enough to survive. What had he gotten himself into? When Fiona stirred a few hours later, she found that Vaughn had stopped the wagon near a small creek. He was tending the horses, giving them water and a brief rest. "How long was I asleep?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Couple hours," he replied, approaching the wagon. "Those little ones need tending, I expect." Fiona looked down at her daughters, who had begun to fuss. "Yes, they need to be fed." A flush crept into her cheeks. "I'll need some privacy." Vaughn nodded, understanding her meaning. "I'll set up a spot for you under that cottonwood." "We can't tarry long, though. I want to make it to the next town before nightfall." While Vaughn arranged a makeshift shelter using a blanket draped over the wagon's side, Fiona attempted to stand, her legs wobbling beneath her. "Here," he said, offering his arm. "You lost a fair amount of blood back there." Fiona allowed him to help her to the sheltered spot. "I don't even know your name," she said as she settled against the tree trunk. "Vaughn McAllister," he replied, tipping his hat. "And yours?" "Fiona Riley Montgomery," she answered. "Though I'd prefer to just be Fiona Riley again after what James tried to do." Vaughn nodded. "And these little ones?" Fiona looked down at her daughters. "This is Sarah," she said, nodding to the baby in her right arm. "And this is Emma. They're only 3 days old." Vaughn's expression softened as he looked at the tiny infants. "They're fighters like their mama." While Fiona nursed her daughters, Vaughn prepared a simple meal of jerky, hardtack, and coffee. His mind raced with plans and contingencies. Taking a woman and 2 newborns to his isolated ranch wasn't what he'd planned, but he couldn't have left them to die. Once Fiona had eaten and the babies were settled again, they resumed their journey. Vaughn had decided they would stop in the small settlement of Rock Springs for the night. They'd need proper supplies for the babies and a doctor to check on Fiona. "Tell me about James," Vaughn said as they traveled. "Will he follow us?" Fiona sighed, her hand absently stroking Emma's tiny head. "My husband, William Montgomery, owned one of the larger cattle operations near Laramie. When he died of fever 2 months ago, his brother James expected to inherit everything." Her voice grew bitter. "But William had changed his will when he learned I was with child. He left the ranch to his unborn heir, with me as guardian until the child came of age." "And James didn't take kindly to that arrangement," Vaughn surmised. "No, but he bided his time, waiting to see if I'd bear a son." Fiona looked down at her daughters. "When the midwife announced I'd delivered twin girls, James stormed in, raging that females couldn't properly inherit the Montgomery legacy. He'd been drinking for hours." Vaughn's jaw tightened. "So he decided to eliminate the problem." Fiona nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "He would have killed them and me if you hadn't intervened." She paused, struggling to maintain her composure. "He'll follow us. The Montgomery ranch is worth a small fortune and James won't give up his claim easily." They fell silent as the wagon rolled on. Vaughn's mind worked through options. James Montgomery likely had resources and connections the pursuit wouldn't end quickly or easily. His small ranch outside Jackson suddenly seemed less like a sanctuary and more like a trap waiting to be sprung. As evening approached, the lights of Rock Springs appeared on the horizon. Fiona had dozed off again, her body demanding the rest she desperately needed to recover from childbirth and trauma. Vaughn guided the wagon to the town's only hotel, a modest 2-story structure with peeling paint and sagging steps. The proprietor, a stout woman named Mrs. Hollies, took one look at Fiona and the babies and immediately arranged for a room and hot water. "Your wife needs rest," Mrs. Hollies told Vaughn matter-of-factly, misunderstanding their relationship. "I'll send for Doc Peterson." Vaughn didn't correct her assumption. It was safer for Fiona if people believed she was his wife, not a widow on the run. Once she and the babies were settled in the room, Vaughn went to purchase supplies: cloth diapers, baby blankets, milk, and a small carriage that could be attached to the wagon. When he returned, the doctor was just leaving. "Your wife is exhausted and somewhat malnourished," Doc Peterson informed him. "She's also running a slight fever, nothing alarming yet, but something to watch." Those twins are small but healthy, considering their early arrival. Keep her resting as much as possible for the next week or two. Vaughn nodded, accepting the medicine the doctor handed him. Thank you, Doc. Inside the room, Fiona was sitting up in bed, both babies sleeping in a makeshift crib fashioned from a dresser drawer. Her face was clean, her hair combed back, and she wore a nightgown provided by Mrs. Hollies. The doctor says you need rest, Vaughn said, setting down his purchases. You didn't tell him I'm not your wife, she observed. Vaughn shrugged. Seemed simpler this way, less questions. He hesitated. I got some things for the babies and for the journey. We should leave at first light tomorrow. Fiona eyed him carefully. Mr. McAllister, why are you helping us? You don't know me. You're risking your life for strangers. It was a fair question, one Vaughn had been asking himself since they'd left Laramie. He removed his hat and ran a hand through his sandy brown hair. My sister died in childbirth, he said finally, his voice low. Her husband blamed the baby a girl and abandoned her with my parents. I was 16 when it happened. He met Fiona's gaze. No child deserves to be unwanted because of their gender. No mother deserves to die for bringing daughters into the world. Tears welled in Fiona's eyes. I'm sorry about your sister. Vaughn nodded, uncomfortable with her sympathy. Get some sleep, Mrs. Montgomery. Tomorrow will be a long day. It's Miss Riley now, she corrected gently. I'm done with the Montgomery name. Before dawn the next morning, they were on the road again. Fiona felt marginally better after a night in a real bed, though her body still ached from childbirth and her escape. The babies had fed well during the night and were now swaddled snugly in new blankets, nestled in the small carriage Vaughn had purchased. They traveled steadily throughout the day, stopping only when necessary to feed the twins or to rest the horses. Vaughn remained vigilant, frequently checking the trail behind them for signs of pursuit. We'll follow the Green River north, he explained as they ate a simple lunch. It's longer than cutting straight across, but the water's reliable and there are more settlements if we need help. Fiona nodded, grateful for his foresight. How far is Jackson? About 10 days at this pace, Vaughn replied. Less if we push harder, but with the little ones, we need to take it slow. That evening, they made camp by the river. Vaughn built a small fire and prepared a more substantial meal than they'd had on the road. While they ate, Fiona studied her rescuer by the firelight. Vaughn McAllister wasn't conventionally handsome, but his face was striking, weathered from years under the Wyoming sun, with sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. His eyes, a clear blue-gray, seemed to miss nothing. He moved with the quiet efficiency of a man accustomed to relying on himself. Tell me about your ranch, Fiona said, breaking the comfortable silence. Vaughn poked at the fire. It's not much, about 100 acres in a valley southeast of Jackson. Small herd of cattle, a decent vegetable garden, a few chickens, he shrugged. The cabin's solid 2 rooms and a lean-to I use as a kitchen in summer, nothing fancy. It sounds wonderful, Fiona said sincerely. Vaughn glanced at her, searching for mockery, but found only genuine interest. My nearest neighbor is 3 miles away, a widow named Mrs. Larson. She's in her 60s, tough as rawhide. She'll be a help with the babies, I expect. The casual way he included her and the twins in his future plans made Fiona's heart constrict with gratitude and something else she couldn't name. Mr. McAllister, she began hesitantly, I can't impose on you indefinitely. Once we reach Jackson, perhaps you could help me find work. I can cook and sew, and I kept the books for my husband's ranch. Vaughn frowned. You're not imposing, and there's no need to think about that now. Let's get you and those little ones safely to Jackson first. Fiona wanted to press the issue but recognized the stubborn set of his jaw. Instead, she asked, what about your family? You mentioned your parents took in your sister's daughter. A shadow passed over Vaughn's face. They've passed on. 5 years ago now, influenza took them both within days of each other. He stared into the flames. My niece Charlotte is 19 now. She married a shopkeeper's son in Denver last year. I'm sorry, Fiona said softly. So you're alone, by choice, Vaughn clarified. I prefer the quiet. They fell silent again as night settled fully around them. Sarah began to fuss, and Fiona lifted her to nurse. Vaughn stood respectfully and announced he'd check on the horses. Later, As Fiona settled with the babies in the wagon and Vaughn prepared to sleep on the ground nearby, she found herself wondering about this solitary cowboy who'd risked everything for her and her daughters. There was kindness beneath his gruff exterior, a fundamental decency that had become her salvation. Sleep came easier that night, despite the discomfort of the wagon. For the first time since William's death, Fiona felt something close to safe. The next morning dawned clear and cool. They had just finished breakfast when Vaughn stiffened, his hand moving to his gun. "What is it?" Fiona asked, immediately gathering her babies close. "Riders," he said tersely. "3 of them coming fast from the south." Fear clutched at Fiona's throat. "James." "Get in the wagon," Vaughn ordered, already moving to hitch the horses. "Keep your head down and the babies quiet if you can." Within minutes, they were moving again, the wagon jolting as Vaughn pushed the horses to a faster pace than was comfortable on the rough trail. Fiona held her breath, straining to hear the approaching riders. The thunder of hooves grew louder, and then a voice called out, "Halt in the name of the law." Vaughn cursed under his breath but slowed the wagon. He turned to Fiona. "Sheriff's posse, James must have filed charges." Fiona's blood ran cold. "What do we do?" "Let me handle it," Vaughn said, his expression grim. "Whatever they say, remember you're my wife, and we're traveling to our home in Jackson." The riders caught up quickly, 3 men, led by a barrel-chested individual wearing a tarnished star on his vest. "Vaughn McAllister," the sheriff called. Vaughn nodded, his face carefully neutral. "That's me. I'm Sheriff Donovan from Laramie. We've had reports you abducted a widow woman and her babies. That true?" Before Vaughn could answer, Fiona spoke up, her voice stronger than she felt. "That's ridiculous. I'm his wife." The sheriff eyed her suspiciously, noting the twins in her arms. "James Montgomery claims you're his brother's widow, madam, says this man took you against your will." "James Montgomery tried to kill me and my daughters," Fiona replied, her voice shaking with anger. "My husband Vaughn saved our lives." The sheriff dismounted and approached the wagon. "You have any proof of your marriage?" "We married in Jackson," Vaughn improvised smoothly. "My wife was visiting her brother in Laramie when she went into labor early. I came to collect her and my daughters." The sheriff looked unconvinced. "Montgomery's a prominent rancher with a lot of influence. He's offering a substantial reward for your return, madam." "And if I go back, my children and I will be dead within a day," Fiona stated flatly. "James wanted sons to inherit the Montgomery ranch. When I gave birth to daughters, he tried to kill us all." One of the other men spoke up. "Sheriff, the lady's got a point. Doc Wilson did mention something about the Montgomery brother being drunk and threatening at the birthing." Sheriff Donovan frowned, clearly weighing his options. "I can't just ride back empty-handed. Montgomery's raised half the county looking for you." "Then arrest me," Vaughn offered calmly. "Take me back to Laramie to face charges, but let my wife and daughters continue to Jackson, where they'll be safe." "No," Fiona protested, genuinely alarmed. The sheriff studied them both, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. Finally, he sighed. "I've known James Montgomery for 15 years, never much liked the man, too quick with his fists when he's drinking." He adjusted his hat. "But I can't ignore a formal complaint." Fiona's heart sank as the sheriff continued. "Tell you what, I'll escort you both to Green River. The circuit judge is there this week. We'll let him sort this out." He looked pointedly at Fiona. "If what you say is true, madam, the judge will recognize it. He's a fair man." It wasn't ideal, but it was better than being forcibly returned to Laramie. Vaughn nodded his agreement, and their small caravan began moving toward Green River, now with a law enforcement escort. They traveled in tense silence for several hours. Occasionally, one of the deputies would ride ahead to scout the trail, but mostly they stayed close to the wagon. Fiona tended to the twins, her mind racing with worry. What if the judge didn't believe them? What if he ordered her back to Laramie? As they made camp that evening, Sheriff Donovan approached Vaughn as he gathered firewood. "Montgomery claims you shot at him," he said without preamble. "I did," Vaughn admitted. "He was about to put a bullet in a woman holding newborn babies." The sheriff grunted. "That matches what Doc Wilson said about the state of things." He lowered his voice. "Listen, McAllister, I've got no personal stake in this. But if that woman is telling the truth, and James Montgomery tried to kill her and those babies." He left the sentence unfinished. She's telling the truth, Vaughn assured him. Then you'd better have a plan for when we reach Green River, the sheriff advised. Because James Montgomery will be there, and he won't be alone. The warning lingered in Vaughn's mind as he returned to camp. He'd hoped to avoid a direct confrontation with James, at least until Fiona and the twins were safely established at his ranch. Now it seemed that confrontation would come sooner rather than later. That night, after the deputies had settled on the other side of the camp, Vaughn spoke quietly to Fiona. "We need to be prepared for what happens in Green River. If the judge rules against us, I can't go back to Laramie," Fiona interrupted, her eyes wide with fear. "He'll kill us, Vaughn. He'll kill my babies." It was the first time she'd used his given name, and something shifted between them in that moment. "I won't let that happen," he promised, his voice low and fierce. "But we need to convince the judge of the danger. Do you have any proof of your husband's will? Anything showing the babies are the rightful heirs?" Fiona hesitated, then reached into her bodice and withdrew a folded paper. "I kept this on me, even when I ran. It's a letter from William to his lawyer, instructing him to change the will when he learned I was expecting." Vaughn took the paper carefully. "This helps, but we'll need more. The sheriff mentioned Doc Wilson saw James's behavior after the birth. We'll need his testimony." They talked late into the night, formulating a strategy for the hearing. When Fiona finally slept, Vaughn remained awake, watching the stars and considering what might lie ahead. He'd acted on impulse when he saved Fiona and her daughters, but now he found himself deeply invested in their welfare and not just out of duty or principle. There was something about Fiona's courage, her fierce protection of her children, that resonated with him. The solitary life he'd built for himself suddenly seemed empty when he contemplated returning to it alone. Green River came into view late the next afternoon, a cluster of buildings straddling the river that gave the settlement its name. The town had grown since Vaughn had last passed through, with several new businesses and more permanent structures replacing earlier tents and shacks. Sheriff Donovan led them directly to the courthouse, a solid 2-story building that also housed the jail. As they approached, Vaughn spotted several horses tied outside expensive animals with tooled leather saddles. "Looks like Montgomery beat us here," the sheriff observed, confirming Vaughn's suspicion. Fiona clutched the twins closer, her face pale but determined. "What do we do?" "We face him," Vaughn said simply. "Together." The sheriff helped Fiona down from the wagon, and Vaughn followed, positioning himself protectively at her side. As they entered the courthouse, the tense atmosphere was immediately apparent. James Montgomery stood at the far end of the room, flanked by 2 men who had the hard look of hired guns. Beside him was a well-dressed man who could only be his lawyer, James's face contorted with rage when he spotted Fiona and the babies. "There she is," he shouted. The thieving widow and her worthless get. Vaughn's hand moved instinctively to his gun, but Sheriff Donovan stepped between them. "That's enough, Montgomery. The judge will hear both sides." A door opened, and the circuit judge entered, a tall, thin man with spectacles and a neatly trimmed white beard. "What's all this commotion in my courtroom?" he demanded. The next hour passed in a blur of accusations and testimony. James claimed that Fiona had conspired with Vaughn to steal what rightfully belonged to the Montgomery family. His lawyer argued that female children couldn't properly inherit the ranch under Wyoming territorial law. When Fiona's turn came, she stood with quiet dignity, the twins sleeping in her arms. "My husband, William Montgomery, wanted our child to inherit regardless of gender," she stated clearly. "He changed his will specifically to ensure that would happen. When I gave birth to twin girls, his brother threatened to kill us all, claiming that only males should inherit Montgomery land." She presented William's letter, and the judge read it carefully. Then, in a stroke of unexpected fortune, Doc Wilson himself appeared, having traveled from Laramie when he heard about the dispute. "I was present at the birth," the elderly doctor testified. James Montgomery burst in, drunk as a skunk, ranting about female babies being worthless. "He threatened both mother and children. I feared for their lives." James lunged forward, She bewitched my brother. Those girls will ruin everything we built." "Order," the judge thundered, banging his gavel. "One more outburst, Mr. Montgomery, and I'll have you removed." After hearing all testimony, the judge retired to consider his decision. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as they waited. Fiona leaned against Vaughn, drawing strength from his solid presence. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "thank you for what you've done." Vaughn covered her hand with his. "We're not finished yet." When the judge returned, his expression was grave. "This is a complex matter of both law and morality," he began. "The letter from William Montgomery clearly expresses his intent for his child to inherit, regardless of gender. Wyoming Territory has been progressive in recognizing women's rights, and I see no reason why female children should be barred from inheriting their father's property." James swore loudly, but the judge continued, "However, there is the matter of guardianship. Mrs. Montgomery Riley," Fiona corrected. "I wish to return to my maiden name," the judge nodded. "Miss Riley, then. As mother and legal guardian of William Montgomery's heirs, you have the right to manage the property until they come of age." He fixed James with a stern look. "Mr. Montgomery, your behavior has been reprehensible. I am issuing a restraining order preventing you from approaching Miss Riley or her children." James's face purpled with rage. "This isn't over," he shouted. "Those brats will never see a penny of Montgomery money." "Additionally," the judge continued, raising his voice, "I am ordering an investigation into the threats made against Miss Riley and her children. Sheriff Donovan, please take Mr. Montgomery into custody pending that investigation." The sheriff moved toward James, but one of the hired guns stepped forward, hand hovering near his pistol. The room froze in a moment of dangerous tension. Vaughn moved slightly, positioning himself to draw if necessary. The moment stretched, balanced on a knife's edge. Then, unexpectedly, James laughed a cold, cruel sound. "Keep the worthless ranch," he spat at Fiona. "It's mortgaged to the hilt anyway. William was a fool with money borrowed against everything to expand, banks going to foreclose within the month." With that parting revelation, James stormed out, his hired guns and lawyer following in his wake. The sheriff glanced at the judge, who nodded. "Let him go for now, but keep an eye on him, Sheriff." Fiona sank into a chair, the twins still sleeping peacefully despite the drama. "Is it true?" she asked numbly. "About the mortgage," the judge sighed. "I'm afraid it might be. Land records would show any liens against the property." The victory suddenly felt hollow. Even if the ranch was rightfully her daughter's, they might lose it anyway to creditors. Outside the courthouse, Vaughn and Fiona stood in the fading afternoon light, the future once again uncertain. "What now?" Fiona asked quietly. Vaughn considered for a moment, then said with simple certainty, "We continue to Jackson, as planned. My offer stands. You and the girls have a place with me for as long as you need it." Relief and gratitude washed over Fiona's face. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "There's nothing to repay," Vaughn assured her, "but first we should check those land records. Knowledge is power, even if the news isn't good." The county clerk confirmed James's claim the Montgomery ranch was indeed heavily mortgaged, with payments already in arrears. The bank was preparing to foreclose within weeks. "William must have been desperate to expand," Fiona murmured, stunned by the revelation. "He never told me how bad things were." They secured rooms at the local hotel, needing time to process this new development and rest before continuing their journey. That evening, after the twins were fed and sleeping, Vaughn and Fiona sat in the hotel's small dining room picking at their food. "Maybe it's for the best," Fiona said eventually. "The ranch holds too many painful memories now." Vaughn watched her carefully. "Do you want to fight for it?" "For your daughter's inheritance," Fiona considered the question. "A month ago, I would have said yes without hesitation, but now—" she looked toward their room where the twins slept. "Now I just want them to be safe and loved. A legacy built on blood and hatred isn't worth preserving." Vaughn nodded, understanding her choice. "My offer remains. My ranch isn't grand, but it's peaceful. The girls could grow up there, away from all this." Something in his tone made Fiona look up sharply. "As what, Mr. McAllister? Your tenants, your charity cases?" The question hung between them, fraught with unspoken possibilities. Vaughn set down his fork, meeting her gaze directly. "I don't rightly know," he admitted. "This isn't how I planned things, but I do know that in the past few days you've shown more courage than most men I've known in a lifetime." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I respect you, Miss Riley, and I care what happens to you and those little girls." It wasn't quite a declaration, but it was honest, and for now, it was enough. Fiona reached across the table and briefly touched his hand. "Then let's go to Jackson," she said simply. They left Green River the next morning, traveling north along the river. Without the sheriff's posse accompanying them, they moved more freely, setting their own pace. The twins were growing stronger each day, and Fiona's health was improving as well. The journey took them through spectacular country, towering mountains, vast meadows filled with wildflowers, dense forests of pine and aspen. Each night they camped under the stars, and each day the easy companionship between them deepened. Vaughn found himself sharing stories he'd never told anyone about his childhood in Missouri, his sister's tragic death, his years driving cattle across the territories. Fiona spoke of her own past growing up in St. Louis, coming west as a teacher, meeting William Montgomery when she was 22 and he was 45. "It wasn't a love match," she admitted one evening as they sat by the campfire. "But he was kind in his way. He wanted an heir, and I wanted security and a chance at motherhood." "Were you happy?" Vaughn asked. Fiona considered the question. "Content, perhaps, not unhappy." She looked into the flames. "I didn't know what happiness might feel like until recently." The implications of her words hung in the air between them, neither quite ready to acknowledge them fully. As they approached Jackson, Vaughn grew increasingly thoughtful. His isolated life had suited him for years, but now, with Fiona and the twins about to enter it, he saw his home through new eyes. Was it enough? Would they be comfortable there? Would they stay, or would they eventually move on to somewhere with more opportunities? The questions troubled him more than he cared to admit. They crested a rise on the 10th day of their journey, and Vaughn reined in the horses. "There it is," he said, pointing to the valley below. "Jackson." The settlement was small but growing, a cluster of buildings nestled at the base of the magnificent Teton Mountains. Beyond the town proper, scattered homesteads dotted the landscape. "It's beautiful," Fiona breathed, taking in the panoramic view. "My place is about 5 miles southeast," Vaughn explained. "We'll stop in town for supplies first." Their arrival in Jackson caused a predictable stir. Strangers were common enough, but a man returning with a woman and newborn twins sparked immediate interest and speculation. Vaughn endured the curious stares stoically as he purchased supplies at the general store. "McAllister," the storekeeper greeted him. "Heard you were off driving cattle to the railroad. Didn't expect you back with a family." "Life's full of surprises, Hanson," Vaughn replied evenly. Word spread quickly, and by the time they'd loaded their supplies, several townspeople had found reasons to pass by the store. Fiona handled the attention with grace, introducing herself as Fiona Riley and the twins as Sarah and Emma. As they prepared to leave, an older woman approached them directly. "Mrs. Larson," Vaughn greeted her, tipping his hat. "Good to see you. So this is why you were in such a rush to get that second bedroom finished before you left," she observed shrewdly. Vaughn actually blushed slightly. "It's not, we're not," he stammered, then collected himself. "Miss Riley and her daughters needed a place to stay. I offered mine." Mrs. Larson's eyes twinkled as she turned to Fiona. "He's a good man, this one, gruff as a bear sometimes, but solid through and through." She peered at the twins. "Beautiful babies. I'll come by tomorrow with some of my preserves and to see if you need any help getting settled." Fiona thanked her warmly, and they continued on their way. The last leg of their journey took them through rolling hills covered in sage and wildflowers. As the sun began to set, Vaughn pointed ahead. "There it is," he said. "Home." The cabin sat in a small valley, sheltered by cottonwood trees and backed by a gentle rise. It was larger than Fiona had expected, solidly built of logs with a stone chimney. A corral and small barn stood nearby, and beyond them, a fenced vegetable garden. A stream ran along one edge of the property, its banks lined with willows. Vaughn helped Fiona down from the wagon, then carefully lifted the sleeping twins in their carrier. He hesitated at the cabin door, suddenly awkward. "It's not much," he said again. Fiona took in the peaceful setting, the solid cabin, and the man standing uncertainly before her. "It's perfect," she said softly. Inside, the cabin was simple but surprisingly comfortable. The main room held a table, chairs, a rocking chair by the fireplace, and shelves lined with books more than Fiona would have expected from a cowboy. A curtained doorway led to the second bedroom, which contained a newly built bed and a cradle also new. "You built this for the babies?" Fiona asked, touching the smooth wood of the cradle. Vaughn shifted uncomfortably. "Figured they'd need somewhere to sleep." The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought tears to Fiona's eyes. This man, who owed her nothing, had prepared for her children's arrival with such care. "Thank you," she said simply, unable to express the depth of her gratitude. They settled into a routine over the following weeks. Vaughn worked the ranch during the day, tending his small herd and maintaining the property. Fiona cared for the twins and gradually took over the household tasks, discovering that she enjoyed the domestic rhythms of their shared life. Mrs. Larson visited regularly, bringing not only practical assistance with the babies, but also welcome female companionship. Through her, Fiona began to make connections with other families in the area. Summer bloomed fully across the valley, bringing long, warm days and soft, star-filled nights. The twins grew rapidly, their personalities beginning to emerge, Sarah serious and observant, Emma more animated and demanding. Vaughn, initially awkward around the babies, gradually became more comfortable holding them and even soothing them when they fussed. One evening in late July, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Fiona broached the subject they'd both been avoiding. "I've been thinking about what happens next," she said carefully. "The twins and I have imposed on your hospitality for almost 2 months now." Vaughn tensed beside her. "You're not imposing." "Nevertheless," Fiona continued, "I need to consider our future. Mrs. Larson mentioned that the school in Jackson might need a teacher come fall." The thought of Fiona and the twins moving to town sent a jolt of alarm through Vaughn. He'd grown accustomed to their presence, to Fiona's smile greeting him when he returned from working the range, to the twins' soft noises as they slept, to shared meals and quiet conversations in the evenings. "Is that what you want?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Fiona studied his profile in the fading light. "What I want," she said softly, "is to stop feeling like a burden, to contribute, to build something secure for my daughters." Vaughn turned to face her directly. "You're not a burden, Fiona, you never have been." He took a deep breath. "Truth is, this place hasn't felt like a home in years. Not until you and the girls came." The admission cost him something. Vaughn wasn't a man accustomed to revealing his feelings, but the past weeks had changed him, opening something in his heart he'd thought closed forever. Fiona's eyes widened at his words. "What are you saying, Vaughn?" "I'm saying I don't want you to leave," he replied honestly. "I'm saying I care for you, for Sarah and Emma too. And if you'd consider staying not as a guest or out of gratitude, but because you might come to care for me too." He didn't finish the sentence because Fiona had moved closer, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "I already do," she whispered. The kiss that followed was gentle, tentative, a beginning rather than a culmination. When they parted, Vaughn's eyes held a question. "I'm not asking for promises," he said. "Just time to see if what's growing between us is something that could last." Fiona's smile was radiant in the gathering twilight. "Time is exactly what we have," Vaughn McAllister. That night, Fiona slept more peacefully than she had in months, secure in the knowledge that she and her daughters were truly home. August brought the harvest, vegetables from the garden, wild berries from the hillsides, and the first cutting of hay for winter feed. Vaughn and Fiona worked side by side, falling into an easy partnership that felt natural to them both. Word reached them that James Montgomery had left Wyoming Territory, heading for California after selling what remained of his interest in his brother's ranch. The bank had indeed foreclosed, and the property had been purchased by a cattle company from Chicago. "Does it bother you?" Vaughn asked when Fiona shared the news. Knowing the girls won't inherit the Montgomery land, Fiona looked around at the valley that had become their home. "No," she said truthfully. They'll inherit something far more valuable, a place where they're wanted and loved. As summer waned, and the first hints of autumn touched the aspen leaves, Vaughn rode into Jackson for supplies and returned with something else entirely, a gold ring, simple but beautifully crafted. That evening, as the twins slept peacefully in their cradle, Vaughn knelt before Fiona in front of the fireplace. "I'm not a wealthy man," he began, "and I'm not always good with words, but I love you, Fiona Riley. I love Sarah and Emma as if they were my own. I want to be a family properly, legally." He held out the ring. "Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Fiona's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were wed 2 weeks later in Jackson's small church, with Mrs. Larson holding the twins during the ceremony. The entire settlement turned out for the occasion, welcoming Fiona and her daughters into their community. "Mrs. McAllister," Vaughn said that evening as they stood on the porch of their cabin, the twins asleep inside. "How does it sound?" "Perfect," Fiona replied, leaning into his embrace. "Absolutely perfect." Winter arrived early that year, blanketing the valley in snow and confining them largely to the cabin. But the long months of isolation only strengthened their bond. Vaughn taught Fiona to play chess by the firelight. She read aloud from his collection of books. Together, they planned improvements for the ranch: a larger garden, more cattle, perhaps even a proper bedroom for the twins when they were older. When spring finally returned to the valley, it brought with it a letter from Denver. Vaughn's niece Charlotte was expecting her first child and wanted her uncle and his new family to visit. "We could go in June," Vaughn suggested. "The weather should be good for traveling with the twins." Fiona agreed, excited by the prospect of a journey and the chance to meet Vaughn's only living relative. But as the weeks passed, she began to suspect that their family might be growing sooner than expected. Her suspicions were confirmed by Mrs. Larson, who had raised 6 children of her own and recognized the signs immediately. "You're carrying again, dear," she announced during one of her visits. "I'd say due in late autumn." That night, Fiona shared the news with Vaughn. His reaction, joy mixed with concern for her well-being, only confirmed what she already knew. She had found a partner worthy of her trust and love. "The twins will be just over a year old when this one arrives," she mused, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. 3 babies under 2 years old. Vaughn chuckled, pulling her close. "Good thing we have each other then." The journey to Denver was postponed with a promise to visit the following spring instead. Charlotte understood completely, sending back a warm letter welcoming Fiona to the family and expressing her excitement about the cousins who would grow up together, even at a distance. The valley bloomed again with summer wildflowers as the twins celebrated their first birthday. They were walking now, tottering around the cabin and yard, exploring their world with endless curiosity. Sarah remained the more thoughtful of the two, studying everything before attempting it, while Emma charged headlong into new experiences. Vaughn built an addition to the cabin that summer, a proper bedroom for the twins and a nursery for the coming baby. The ranch prospered, with the cattle herd growing and the garden producing abundantly. In October, as the aspen leaves turned gold and the first snow dusted the mountain peaks, Fiona gave birth to a son. They named him William Vaughn McAllister, honoring both Fiona's first husband and the man who had become father to his daughters. "He has your eyes," Fiona told Vaughn as he held his son for the first time, his expression one of wonder and fierce love. "And your spirit, I'll wager," Vaughn replied, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. The twins were fascinated by their new brother, peering into his cradle with matching expressions of curiosity. "Baby," Sarah pronounced solemnly, while Emma tried to share her wooden horse with the newborn. That winter was particularly harsh, with heavy snowfall and bitter cold. But inside the cabin, warmth and love abounded. The family established new routines around the baby's needs, with Vaughn taking on more care of the twins to allow Fiona time with little William. "I never imagined this life," Vaughn admitted one evening as they sat by the fire, the children all sleeping soundly. "Never thought I'd have a family of my own." Fiona leaned against him, content in his embrace. "When I ran from Laramie with the twins, I thought our lives were ending," she said softly. I never dreamed we were running towards something so beautiful. Do you ever regret it? Vaughn asked. Leaving the Montgomery ranch, the life you might have had there, Fiona shook her head decisively. Never. That place would have been built on fear and resentment. Here, our children will grow up knowing only love and acceptance. She looked up at him, her eyes shining in the firelight. You saved us, Vaughn McAllister, not just our lives, but our future. You saved me too, he replied, his voice rough with emotion. From a lifetime of loneliness I didn't even know I was facing. When spring returned to the valley once more, they finally made the journey to Denver. Charlotte and her husband welcomed them warmly, marveling at the twins' growth and cooing over baby William. The cousins Charlotte's daughter Mary and the McAllister children formed an immediate bond despite their age differences. You've built a beautiful family, Uncle Vaughn, Charlotte observed as they watched the children play. Aunt Grace would be so proud. The mention of his sister brought a bittersweet smile to Vaughn's face. I like to think she had a hand in bringing us together, he said, glancing at Fiona. Something led me to Laramie at exactly the right moment. The years that followed brought both joys and challenges. The ranch expanded, with Vaughn and Fiona working as true partners in all aspects of their life together. 2 more children joined their family, another daughter, Margaret, born in the spring of 1881, and a second son, Joseph, who arrived in the summer of 1883. The twins grew into capable, confident young women, as different in personality as they were identical in appearance. Sarah showed an early aptitude for learning, devouring every book she could find and dreaming of attending university someday. Emma was more practical, happiest when working alongside Vaughn with the horses and cattle. William, their eldest son, combined his father's quiet strength with his mother's compassion, becoming the peacemaker among the siblings. Margaret inherited Fiona's teaching ability, often gathering the younger children of nearby ranches for impromptu lessons. Joseph, the youngest, possessed a natural charm that made him a favorite throughout the growing community around Jackson. As Wyoming moved toward statehood, Fiona became involved in the women's suffrage movement, proud that their territory was leading the nation in recognizing women's right to vote. Vaughn supported her efforts completely, often caring for the younger children while she attended meetings in Jackson. Our daughters will have opportunities we never imagined, Fiona told him one evening as they reviewed Sarah's letter from the ladies' seminary she now attended in Denver. They'll never be valued only for the sons they might bear. They have their mother's strength to thank for that, Vaughn replied, pride evident in his voice. In 1890, as Wyoming became the 44th state and the first to grant women full suffrage rights, the McAllisters celebrated another milestone, their 10th wedding anniversary. Friends and neighbors gathered at the ranch, which had grown into one of the most prosperous in the valley. During the celebration, Mrs. Larson, now in her 70s, but still sharp as ever, raised her glass in a toast. To Vaughn and Fiona McAllister, she declared. Proof that sometimes the bravest decision a person can make is to open their heart. Later that night, as they stood on the porch of the cabin that had become a proper house over the years, Vaughn wrapped his arms around his wife. Remember that day in Laramie, he asked. When I told you that you were coming with me, Fiona nodded, leaning back against his chest. I was terrified, and yet somehow I trusted you immediately. I had no plan, Vaughn admitted with a chuckle. No idea what I was getting myself into. Just knew I couldn't let anything happen to you and those babies. The best decisions rarely come from careful planning, Fiona replied, turning in his arms to face him. They come from the heart. As the stars appeared above the valley that had become their kingdom, Vaughn McAllister kissed his wife with the same tenderness he'd shown on that first evening on the porch, when possibilities had just begun to unfold between them. I love you, Fiona McAllister, he murmured against her lips. Every day more than the day before. And I love you, she whispered back. My cowboy, my savior, my heart. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were cherished. Outside, the Wyoming night wrapped around the homestead they'd built together, a place founded on courage, nurtured by commitment, and sustained by a love that had begun with 6 simple words. You're coming with me, the cowboy had declared, and she had.